This took place in about 2003. I was working for the Memphis Police Department. Another officer and I got dispatched to a call where a homeowner woke up and found someone in his house and he had an axe. We got there and we were met by an elderly man in his night clothes holding a double-bladed axe with a red stain on the blade. As I secured the weapon, the old man said he woke up and found someone in his bedroom, so he went out and got his axe and hit them with it. My partner and I exchanged looks because there is no way an intruder would stay put while the old man went to get an axe. Then the old man hit us with the comment that the intruder was dead in the bedroom. My partner, who had previous military experience and served overseas in Iraq, went to the bedroom to check. I heard a chirp and then my partner got on the radio requesting for EMT. He told the dispatcher there was an elderly lady lying on the floor next to the bed who was alive and hurt bad yet unresponsive. At this time, the old man told me about his wife whom lived with him and was asleep in the bedroom. A third officer got there about the same time as the paramedics and assisted me in detaining the old man. I went back in to check on the scene and see about my partner. As I entered the bedroom, the paramedics began lifting the lady to put her on a stretcher. The sight was gruesome and I don't feel like sharing the details. My partner called out, "Just hold on, ma'am." Then from this lady, a grandmotherly voice called out, "Don't worry, baby. I'm okay." At this, my partner, a hardened war vet, nearly fainted. A paramedic had to keep him on his feet. It amazed me that such a frail, old-looking woman who had such injuries would reassure my partner. The lady was transported to the hospital and I remained on the scene with the old man. He kept saying how he woke up to find a stranger in his home. It got even worse when he asked to see his wife. It was almost like he had no idea of what was going on and didn't see her get carted out to the ambulance. Eventually his kids made the scene. From them I learned that the man had been diagnosed with advanced dementia the day before and they were going to start some type of treatment the next day. They were so mad at themselves that they had waited. It was a somber time for us all. As best the family and I could figure out was apparently the old man woke up in the middle of the night, didn't recognize his wife of 30+ years sleeping next to him, and then went and got the axe. I found out later that the tough old lady survived and her husband had to be put in an assisted living care home. Have you ever seen someone bring a sword to what will turn into a gunfight? A mope goes to his estranged girlfriend's apartment carrying his Japanese ninja sword in what I speculate is an attempt to show her he has changed and given up his violent behavior. She answers the door and pleasantries are exchanged. When he demanded to be let into the apartment, unpleasantries are exchanged. She refuses him entry. She tries to shut the door, but he sticks his foot in the door, preventing it from closing, and unsheaths his sword. He makes a tactical error, not knowing the location and capabilities of enemy forces due to the poor intelligence gathering, and forces entry. The ex-girlfriend starts attempting to get him to leave because their children are home, and he slashes her shoulder with the sword. Now the wounded woman grabs his arm and her mother joins in the fray. They both try to disarm the swordsman. They both get hacked a couple of times with help from the woman's new boyfriend. The new boyfriend begins to wrestle the sword from the old boyfriend, who violently jerks it back, slicing both of the hands of the new boyfriend. The new boyfriend is bleeding profusely from both hands and he is pissed. Did I mention that the new boyfriend is an army recruiter? The new boyfriend assesses the battle and makes a tactical withdrawal from combat. He runs to the bedroom to introduce his little friend, Mr. Beretta 9mm, to the old boyfriend. Just as new boyfriend gets his weapon, old boyfriend, who is in hot pursuit, breaks down the door. The new boyfriend has taken a knee, raised up Mr. Beretta, and sent 2 messengers to stop this criminal act into the brain housing of the old boyfriend. The old boyfriend drops like a ton of crap. New boyfriend starts rendering aid to the wounded woman and got everyone outside. We arrived and called ambulances. When we went inside, there was blood everywhere and a couple pieces of flesh were hacked off. New boyfriend did ask us to check the people living above his girlfriend's apartment because he was afraid one of his rounds might have missed. The new boyfriend, girlfriend, and kids lived happily ever after. The old boyfriend got an all-expense-paid trip to the medical examiner's office. We gave him a C- grade for his efforts. He was winning, until he wasn't. Let's face it, hacking your ex-girlfriend with a sword shows a certain sense of style we have not seen in years. It was an easy clearance for the detectives. While I attempted to make light of this, it really was a gross crime scene. There was so much blood and blood splatter in the living room it was hard to make heads or tails of what had happened. Except for this one incident, I'd say I had a rather pleasant time as a cop. I took my job as a servant to the people seriously, and I always tried to help. I did this for purely selfish reasons. It made me feel good to help, and it made me feel bad when I had to use force. On this incident, I did neither, and it hurt the most. I often took the night shift because that is where the action is. You don't get bored. It was about 2 a.m. and the bars were closing. I was parked in a strip mall within sight of several bars. At 2 a.m. sharp, the last of the bar patrons were pushed out the doors at the bars and started for their cars. From my car, I could see one tall, slim working girl was making her last-ditch effort to be taken home by somebody. She wore a very skimpy dress and she repeatedly flashed her bare chest in tiny panties. It didn't work. When the last guy drove off, leaving her there, she sat down on the ground behind her car. I'm sure it was part of her image, but I noticed her car was a classic Jaguar XJ sedan. It was probably about 10 years old and suffering from a lot of rust, but if you squinted a little, it looked nice. I watched her for about 10 minutes just sitting there. Then she got up and promptly fell down again. She was way too drunk to drive. As she made her way to her car, I started my car and radioed for a female officer to assist me in what I assumed would be a DUI. An officer friend of mine named Judy answered and said she was on her way. I had no jurisdiction until she actually drove her car onto the road, so I waited. As soon as her car reached the road, belching black smoke out the tailpipe, I gave chase and stopped her before she got even a quarter mile. She pulled over into a mall parking lot and I pulled up beside her car about 10 to 15 feet away. She jumped out of her car and immediately flung off her dress. Now wearing only her tiny string panties and high heels, she proceeded to dance around in a very seductive manner, constantly beckoning me to come over to her. Okay, picture this. It's 2:30 a.m. in an empty parking lot and I'm all alone with a sexy drunk female. It was prudent on my part to wait for Officer Judy to arrive rather than risk trying to subdue this woman by myself. I leaned up against my car and watched the show. The drunk woman danced around for a while and then grew either tired or frustrated that I was not reacting, and she pulled off her skimpy panties and got into some serious poses while jumping all over her car. She crawled up onto the roof and then slid down to the hood with her legs spread wide, trying to get a reaction from me. Actually, I was kind of enjoying the show and I felt a little bad that I secretly didn't want Officer Judy to interrupt it. As I was looking down at my watch and wondering where Judy was, the drunk woman slid down the front of her hood and began rubbing herself on the Jaguar hood ornament. She was oohing and ahhing and she humped the chrome ornament as if it was a dildo. Quite suddenly, her foot slipped off the front bumper and she spun around, pivoting on the chrome Jaguar, and fell headfirst over backwards onto the ground, all the while screaming like a banshee. She immediately grabbed her private parts and tucked into a fetal position, still screaming. I ran over to her and not knowing what else to say, I asked, "Are you okay?" She shouted at me, "No, you fucking idiot, I'm not okay." And then she pulled one out from between her legs and grabbed my arm. Her hand was covered in blood. I told her I would call for an ambulance, but I had to go back to my car. She held my arm tightly for a moment and then let go. I ran for my car, but just as I opened my car door, another car with their headlights on bright came up fast and slid to a stop right beside my car. Officer Judy jumped out of her car and shouted to me that she had already called for an ambulance. She then went over to the drunk woman and checked her out. I really couldn't do much but watch. In anticipation of this being a potentially major public incident, I radioed for the dispatch to send over the OIC, officer in charge. He is the senior-most cop in the department that is on duty at this time. I then got out my blanket and first aid kit and gave them to Judy. While I was wondering where Judy came from, the ambulance arrived and took over. The OIC arrived and I explained everything that happened. Judy explained that the woman had ripped her vagina on the hood ornament and had internal bleeding and would probably need surgery. She also told the OIC that she had been parked about 50 yards away and watched the whole thing to see how I would handle it. She vouched for me that I did everything by the book and never did anything that was inappropriate. She said she had decided to drive up to the scene as the woman slid down the hood just moments before she hurt herself. The OIC was upset and scolded Judy for not going directly to the scene, but he shook his finger in her face and said with a smile, "Now don't ever do that again." I spent the next few hours filing out my report and retelling the events several times. The woman was treated and fully recovered. I saw her several weeks later back at work and she had no memory of me. I felt bad about her getting hurt, but I was told by the OIC and Judy that if I had done anything else, it could have been very bad for me and the police department. If Judy had not witnessed the events, the woman could almost certainly have sued the department and me. Judy got chewed out for parking and watching, but nothing serious. I also was mad at her for leaving me in that position for so long. Actually, it was only about 5 minutes. To make it up to me, she bought us both a nice dinner at a local restaurant. When I got transferred and left the police force, I had a goodbye luncheon. It was customary to give the departing person gag gifts. Judy gave me a plastic version of the Jaguar hood ornament, wearing a condom. I've seen death. I've seen abuse. But nothing even comes close to the death notification I had to deliver. I never post these kinds of things in regards to my thoughts and feelings, but I'd like to get this off my chest. It was my first death notification and it was brutal. The victim was struck by a drunk driver driving 100 miles per hour the wrong way on a country road. The car hit her at such an angle that the car somehow climbed on top of her and decapitated her. She was 78. I arrived at the woman's home to speak to her 50-year-old daughter, but she wasn't home. From there I went to the neighbors trying to locate her or figure out when she'd be back. From this I learned that the daughter's father died a year ago and today was the anniversary. Meanwhile, the wife had left her husband of 20 years after finding out he had been cheating on her for about 18 of them. She was staying with her mom because she had no support. Finally, about an hour later, I see her pull up to her mom's house. I approach the daughter and identify myself. She thought I had followed her to give her a ticket and then explained the difficult time she was having in her life and begged me to give her a break. I will never forget her wailing after I told her her mom was dead. She crumbled in front of me and kept screaming for her mom. She said she couldn't do this without her. I sat with her and waited for her sister to arrive from an hour away. I hope I never have to live through a silence like that again. As I drove away, I knew I would never forget that night. Despite everything else I've seen as a soldier and a cop, nothing else ever hit me like that notification that day. On the 7th of March 2015, I was on duty in a marked police car. I was driving straight and traveling 40 miles per hour in a 40 mile per hour zone. I had the green light going through the intersection. An elderly man ran the red light and T-boned me right in the driver's door. I saw the car coming a split second before it hit me. Instinctively, I cranked on the steering wheel to deflect the impact. The car struck my driver's door, causing me to spin around counterclockwise. About halfway into the spin, my right rear tire caught on something. The car continued to spin, but now was airborne. My patrol car landed and rolled 360 degrees. When the car stopped, I tried to get my door open, but it was jammed. I was terrified that the car was going to catch on fire and I would burn alive. This happened to a fellow officer I knew back in 2007. Fortunately, it was a busy intersection with a lot of people. A bunch of men came running up and pried the door open. My only thought was to get away from the car. An off-duty fireman came up and told me to stay still and not move. He reassured me that my car was stable and he put his hands around my neck to stabilize my neck against any possible trauma. Rescue arrived and they slapped a neck collar on me. They then cut my uniform shirt off and my bulletproof vest and removed them from my torso while I was still sitting in the driver's seat. They then cut me out of my gun belt and slipped a backboard behind my back and then rotated me and pulled me into the stretcher. My face was all cut up with glass fragments from the windshield shattering. Glass fragments were embedded in my scalp. Glass shards were in my eyeballs. They got me transported to the trauma center and thank God I was released to go home later that same day. I did a lot of physical therapy and had to have an operation on my shoulder, but recovered 100% through the grace and mercy of God. This is a traffic incident I responded to one day in 1994. I received a call about a wreck on a bridge spanning a 4-lane highway. When I arrived, I saw a Honda Accord sitting on the bridge in the wrong lane of travel on the medium of the highway underneath it, facing back across the bridge. The entire front end of the car in front of the passenger was flat against the passenger compartment with some damage on the passenger's side. Across the bridge, I saw a bread van-type truck with the name of a large tool company plastered on its side. If you aren't aware, these trucks drive from shop to shop selling tools and taking orders. So needless to say, they are heavy. It was sitting in the correct lane of travel about 50 feet in front of the Honda and sitting over the outside of the shoulder highway underneath it, on its end of the bridge. Its front end was bent up but not smashed in very bad. I stop and go over to the front passenger window, which is no longer in the car, to check on the occupants. There's a little girl about 3 years old sitting in a child seat or booster seat, I can't remember, in the front passenger seat. She is crying hysterically, rubbing the top of her head with her left hand. Her scalp is cut across the top of her forehead, and every time she swipes at the place that hurts, she unfolds it back over itself, exposing her skull back over her ears. She had hit the windshield and it sliced her open. Her right leg was broken and swelling, as well as her right arm. Mom was sitting in the driver's seat, dazed, just looking at me. She had a goose egg on her forehead from hitting the steering wheel, blood running down her face. Her right jaw was already swollen from being broken and her right femur was bent at an odd angle as she sat there. Her left arm was angled also from a fracture in her forearm. I told her to grab her daughter's arm and hold it. I wanted as little contamination in her scalp as possible. She grabbed the baby's arm and stared at the dash. She couldn't talk. I ran across the bridge and spoke with the driver of the tool truck. He said that he was traveling straight onto the bridge when the Honda pulled directly into his path as the mom had tried to enter the on-ramp of the freeway. My guess is that she was distracted by the baby or something and didn't see the truck coming. So his tracks smacked the car right across the bridge because of its sheer mass. I couldn't get the picture of that little girl crying and sweeping her scalp back, and then the scalp falling back on her head, out of my head for several weeks. She couldn't figure out what was wrong, but she hurt and it was on the top of her head. There was nothing I could do but make sure the paramedics had a clear path to her and her mom as soon as they got there. That was all I could do. When I worked in narcotics, I would often be called upon to either work in an undercover capacity or set up and monitor audio and video electronic surveillance equipment. I was called back to my department from a task force assignment to work on a case involving a gentleman who was looking to hire a hitman to kill his wife. The detective working the case wanted to act as the gun for hire, but wanted me to set up and monitor an undercover car with audio and video surveillance equipment. The following night, this 50-something-year-old man meets with the detective/hitman and explains in detail not only that he wants his wife killed, but when, where, and how. He explains that she works a night shift and comes out at a specific time to take a smoke break. The man wants his wife shot in the head from a distance with a rifle. He agreed to a price and gave some money to the undercover officer and then left the meeting. Fearing this guy wasn't stable and might take matters into his own hands, we reached out and transported his wife from her job to the station. When she was told of her husband's plans, she became hysterical and went to pieces. He had given her no indication that he was unhappy with their marriage. Next, we had uniform officers pick up this gentleman killer. I got to do his interview. I discussed the situation with him for about 20 minutes and he continually denied trying to hire anyone to harm his wife. He knew we had the hitman at the station, but didn't know he was a cop. He accused him of lying and setting him up and even blackmailing him. I let this go for a while so anyone later listening to this recorded statement would see the depth of his lies. I then gave the signal for the hitman/undercover officer to enter the room. The door opens and in walks the hitman detective wearing his gun and badge. Well, the man just dropped his head in disbelief. The next words out of his mouth I still to this day cannot believe. "Well, she's got bad hips," he said, referring to her arthritis. So he was intending on having his wife murdered, shot in the head, because she had hip pain? We learned later, although not from him, of the more realistic motives including insurance policy, gambling debts, and a relationship with a prostitute. The case didn't need to go to trial as he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to many years in prison. But never before or since that day have I heard such a disturbing reason to murder your own wife as having bad hips. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And if you would like to submit your own story, email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. And if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, you can become a channel member or a patron by following the link in the description or clicking the join button down by the subscribe button. And I appreciate you. I hope you're all having a great day, and I really do appreciate you taking the time to listen to this video, and I hope you found some of these stories disturbing, and yeah, I can't fully understand what police officers have to go through on a daily basis. I know now there's a lot of turmoil going back and forth, but it's not like all police officers are bad, just like not all people are bad. There's bad apples everywhere. No matter where you go, it's gonna happen. Regardless, I will catch you all in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. Bad bye.